Good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So happy you're able to join us today. Our topic is an interesting one. Inquiring minds want to know, what do these new, I won't say green, but newer superintendents than me, what do they really want out of EdTech? Things have changed so significantly. We want to have a discussion around what do new leaders in K-12 really want to see around the EdTech sector. And so we're going to have a very fluid conversation. I'm Barbara Jenkins, your moderator, retired superintendent after 10 years in Orange County Public Schools, about 210,000 students, wonderful place to live and work most years. And so I will be asking the questions. We've got esteemed colleagues here on the stage. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves with a sort of a warm-up question. As you introduce yourself, just say a little bit about the district that you serve or the state that you serve, and tell us briefly, just a couple of sentences around what you think we gained in the use of technology during the pandemic. All right, starting to my right, intro, where you're from, what do you think we gained during the pandemic in technology?
Great, thank you, Barbara. My name is Heather Tauyuk. I'm the superintendent of the Issaquah School District, which is just 15 miles east of Seattle in Washington State. I've been in the role since July of 2022 and have served in the area in other capacities since 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. So I jumped back to a district after having many years of nonprofit executive experience and working in other districts across the country like Providence, Rhode Island, and New York City. I have seen two key things over the course of the time when the pandemic hit, and it's two things. One is to embrace technology as it is, but yet it is incomplete without the strong facilitation, design thinking, and creativity of our teachers to help our students navigate responsibly, ethically, and with accountability to others. And the second is that it's here to stay, and we have to embrace the next world of what will come next, and how that upskilling, not just training, the upskilling and the design thinking of our teachers will need to evolve as we embrace that change moving forward.
Great, good afternoon. I'm Christina Grant. I'm the State Superintendent of Education for Washington, D.C. That's right, a city that will be a state one day. Turn to your neighbor and say, fun fact, there are 58 state superintendents, so there are only 50 states because we have U.S. territories and D.C. is operated through a charter. And so take that home with you. There'll be a pop quiz at the end. I think, the pandemic was really interesting, and I feel like anyone in the room could quickly say, like, technology quickly gave our students access to learning. So if we all go back some 3 years ago where we thought we were going home for 2 weeks, I think systems all across the country quickly realized that we could get children computers, access to the internet. I mean, there are so many policies and frames of thinking that have dramatically changed all across the country, right? We are no longer talking about internet access for all. Like, because of the pandemic, we are forced to make sure that all children can get online. And I think about what that gave us in the moment that we're in now, particularly through the lens of parents. And so parents now understand that school actually never has to close. And so what do snow days mean in the face of technology? What does it mean when a child is sick or has to stay home in the face of technology? And much like what Heather said, where we find ourselves today is like, how do we leverage technology in a way that still amplifies the role of the teacher, the leader, and then how do we make sure that student learning is still up front and prioritized? Data shows us that high schoolers showed us amazing things with technology where we took significant hits across this country in elementary school because, fun fact, you can't teach a kindergartner math while they're sitting at home, with an adult. And so those are the spaces, technology gave us so much, and I think there's a long road ahead as we try to navigate coming out of this pandemic. And like Heather said, the advances we've made in technology are here to stay, and we need to embrace them and make sure our teachers and leaders are ready to embrace that work for their children.
Thank you. My name is Iranetta Wright. I am the Superintendent of Cincinnati Public Schools. I am coming up on my 1-year anniversary on May the 2nd, so really excited about the work that's happening in Cincinnati. I think I would share the things that my colleagues have already shared about what we really learned through the pandemic, but I also think that we realized very, very quickly, as we know for education, we cannot do this work alone. So just providing the computers was not enough. Having access was important, making sure that in cities where there are dead spots, even with access, how you're really working to utilize the hotspots that are in the area, or how you're making sure that truly there is ability and there's capability and there's accessibility for all of our families. I think the other thing that we saw that was really important is there is still a divide. For as long as we've had technology, as long as we've had computers, I think Heather referenced skills. There's a skills deficit, and we've not talked much about this yet, but we also saw a skills deficit with our staff, that there were several that as we were getting ready, and we've used computers for a long time, that as we were getting ready for the next step that goes beyond just the processing, as we're looking at programs, as we're looking at actually teaching and what we're looking at with our student information systems and how we're accessing those things, that there was truly a divide for our staff. So I think we recognized how quickly we could all come together and how we could really go to synchronous and asynchronous professional development and professional learning and pods even for adults to help them really be able to work with students. So those are some of the things that we saw.
Good afternoon, friends. My name is Thomas Taylor. I'm the superintendent for Stafford County Public Schools right outside of Washington, D.C. It's an urban, suburban, and rural school division right outside the D.C. metro area. And I straddled 2 different districts during the pandemic. I came from one district that was very well prepared in terms of technology to make the transition to a virtual learning environment, and towards the end of the pandemic came to Stafford County, which was not. So I can say from that experience how important technology was in helping our children and our teachers and administrative staff manage change. Now, there's still a lot that we have to do, and there are still some pretty significant opportunity gaps that still need to be filled. But for districts that were well prepared with technology, it is a world of difference compared to districts that were not prepared for the transition during the pandemic.
Thank you. Let me acknowledge also, I failed to note that these 4 superintendents are actually members of Chiefs for Change, and our current CEO came in the back door. I want to acknowledge Bob Runcie in the back of the room.
Thanks,
Welcome.
Bob.
So I want to ask a few questions now, because I have a distinct impression that inquiring minds really do want to know what's missing. What should we be looking toward in EdTech for the coming years? So I want to start with this whole notion of knowledge and management and evaluation. So districts and state education departments spend millions on technology, and often we struggle with the integration of those tools and the ability to swiftly disaggregate data. Struggle with integration and the ability to disaggregate data swiftly. Talk about those challenges in your particular setting. Heather, I'll go to you first.
Great. So we are really data rich but insight poor in public education as it relates to the voluminous amounts of data that exist. Just this year, as I was looking at preparing for budget reductions and expense management, I asked my team to undertake an initiative, not just all strategies and priorities initiatives, but specifically what is all the software and what is all the different app and programs that we're using, that we're purchasing, and I got a list that was enormous. And I said to myself, well, this is not the task that we're gonna be able to tackle in the next 3 months. This is a huge task that will take us over a year to both unpack and understand. So we have so many systems that pull on different aspects of our work, from HR to transportation to workflow, work process orders for facilities, to all of our student information systems, to our data systems, to our various curriculum supplements that look at where our kids are and where they're performing. None of those systems talk to each other. And so what we really need is stronger alignment and agreement on data governance and how that actually will help with how we aggregate data and then draw the right insights from that, because our students are one person, or each one is one person, and our families are the unit around them, and they have siblings and other family members who are listed as their support system in our information systems, and we need to bring all that data together, and it's all over the place. It's almost like we replicated paper, because it's actually harder to find some of the data. So this paper, this virtual paper now lives everywhere, and we just don't have the data governance, and we don't have the architecture that helps us bring it together, and the compatibility across systems to be able to have things speak to each other. So I would just implore people to be thinking about how we can get our data systems to talk to each other, really consider data governance, and drive the insights that we need. Otherwise, people are going to start being overwhelmed and not drive towards the right thing, which is excellent service for kids in our classrooms, and also service for our staff and our families as they go through the system.
I love the term you use. We are data rich but insight poor. There has to be a way to more rapidly accumulate the data, disaggregate the data, and answer critical questions real time. That is crucial. If you have districts who are still creating their own separate charts and gathering all of the information for teachers, we're driving teachers crazy. They have to have an ability to digitally look at data and do so swiftly, and then be able to disaggregate. I think one example you used was a board member said, how many students do we have with dyslexia? That was a phenomenal task to pull together. They could not gather that data swiftly. Other thoughts on our panel on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be super quick, but the dyslexia question is so sound. There are anywhere between 8 and 20 different tools that can evaluate for dyslexia. They don't talk to each other. And what's most important is they don't talk back to the teacher. And so even at this systems level, I think about the realities of teaching. I was a 7th grade English teacher. And as much as you know, it is critically important that students need to write and write well. When you are teaching 7th grade English, the ability to give high quality feedback to 120, 150 students every single week, like we still need to turn the corner in technology that teachers could scan written word, get targeted feedback, that they then could differentiate instruction based on that. Right now, that's still very much being done by the teacher. And so those are the advancements in technology that would improve the instructional practices for teachers, because in math, I think it's solved for in a lot of ways, but the foundations, at least for me, no math educators yell at me, but the foundation of it is really, can you read, write, and articulate your thoughts in the written form well? And as we're competing with technology on students' ability to do that, we have to equip teachers with real ways to get that feedback back to children and have it be high quality.
I think the one thing that I will add here as well, and I really connect with what Heather said, I think 12 to 15 years ago, I taught myself how to do Microsoft Access at that time, because we had all of these spreadsheets and all of the information that you needed to really make any informed decisions were in different spreadsheets. And so if you really wanted to take that information and look at how you were going to move forward with anything instructionally for the school at the time, you had to figure out how to get that information in the right spaces. In transitioning to Cincinnati, one of the things that was really important, my team at the time that I went in had just spent about $250,000 on an investment to create a data culture in our district. And so I shared, I can help you figure out how we can save a lot of money. I can help you figure out how to do that very, very quickly. And one of the ways that we do that is what gets monitored gets done. What the leader focuses on happens in the district. So one of the first teams that I met with was the data team, not the instructional team, the data team, so that we could then start by what is the information that we are looking to extrapolate from all of this information that we have, and then how can we put that in a picture that is then fundamentally easy for others to use. And so it's taken about a 6-month period of time, but that team had the expertise to do that. They were just waiting for someone to say, this is what it is that we're looking for. I think the second thing to that, and I know many of us use programs like Clever, for example, where you have all of the different applications that come in, and then you can use one application and it goes through the back office to make sure that you are getting the data that you need for students. But we also have to work with our app providers. with our curriculum providers on playing nicely with each other so that you're getting the right scripts on the back end so that when you're ready to look at where are you really looking to go, you're not looking at 3 or 4 different ways of doing that, but you're looking at one way of doing it so that you're then able to truly make that data meaningful in classes, not just for this particular program or that program.
Thomas, go ahead.
Thank you, Barbara. I just want to close with 3 procurement tips about what I'm looking for as a superintendent, and I'm sure my colleagues would share some of these thoughts as well. If this, whatever it is we're trying to procure, moves us closer to any time, any place, any path, any pace learning, that is a movement in the right direction from us in terms of student engagement. I'm also looking very meaningfully at whether or not your technical specs align through some kind of third-party verification, and that there is proof of concept behind what you are saying. And there's companies that are even designing just how you might third-party verify what you say you can do, you can actually do. And the third is probably the most important, ROI. Is there return on investment for every dollar that I invest in your solution? Is there verifiable information that is going to put me further ahead in moving the needle towards student achievement? And I'm going to give you an example. If the problem I'm trying to solve is that I need to improve literacy growth, and I want to see a jump in student RIT scores on a growth assessment, I need to see evidence of return on investment in a sample size that is larger than 25 units of children whose parents are Silicon Valley executives. So, ROI, anytime, any place, any path, any pace, okay? Those things definitely matter, third-party verification.
That's critical. I think EdTech providers will find more and more superintendents are looking at return on investment. There are calculations actually being done as we speak. Look at the number of students served, look at the actual learning gains, look at the cost of that particular intervention. And so we can calculate, it's much more savvy now than we were in past years around this notion of whether or not the investment is paying off. Because when resources are limited, K-12 has to do a better job of removing things that do not get the work done and not investing in particular products that don't have a research base behind them to make sure they're going to accomplish what they say they can accomplish. I'm going to start with you this time, Thomas. Let me move to the non-instructional side of the house, because that's pretty critical as well. So when it comes to an ERP, transportation, other things that are not instructional, K-12 districts are mega corporations, multi-billion-dollar corporations that have to run the back house side as well. Talk a little bit about the non-instructional side of the house and what you need from those providers.
I would venture to say that if you were to ask any school superintendent if their ERP system worked the way that they had hoped that it would, you would not get a single school superintendent who would answer in the affirmative. That being said, these systems need to talk with one another. Another kind of notion on the same kind of way of thinking is that we are heading towards a fiscal cliff with the end of ESSER funds. The well is so close to running dry, you can already see the bottom. So kind of piggybacking on that comment of ROI, every solution needs to take something off the table instead of adding more to the table. So to the extent that we can automate, to the extent that we can create efficiencies, and to the extent that that can be proven, is to the extent that we're going to be able to utilize a new system. And I got to tell you, we're reaching a point financially in the next several years where superintendents as financial consumers are going to have to be way more selective than they are in the moment for what they actually choose to purchase. So this is going to become all the more important.
I think one that I would add as a specific, and I don't know if anyone in this room has had this challenge or not, but the one thing that's kept me up almost every night this year has been transportation. And when I think about transportation, I think about the way that transportation is done in public transit. And so I would really be interested in our pre-K-12 programs, really looking at how we are doing transportation in the public transit system and how we can then make the parallel to the K-12 system. When we think about, there are really two or three major companies right now, but when you look at the way that it's set up in terms of logistics, it's not done the same way as you would in a public system that's really proven to be more efficient and more effective. So I think that that would be a very specific example that I would be looking at that's non-instructional, but just so important to what we do in instruction every day.
Christina?
Yeah, mine, piggybacks on the transportation conversation, but it extends to school safety as a whole. Be very interested in technological solutions that allow parents to have access to their children from the time they leave their house and until they return, if they're walking to school outside of a cell phone. And so outside of a device that in most schools, we don't want children on their cell phones all day, but we do want technology to play a role, particularly when there's a challenge. And I would be interested in understanding how technology could help play a role in school safety. I transport all of our children in the district, and that is the biggest concern around, with all of our routing software and all of what takes place, a car accident at 5 o'clock on Friday night will disrupt the entire evening. And like the speed with which a parent can know in real time where their child is, much like us using Uber, we don't have those types of systems in the K-12 system. And I think the fourth piece I wanted to add, Tom, to your list, I think many of you will say that, systems leaders are risk adverse in technology, but the fourth part really is student privacy. And so one of the reasons why we are slower on the uptake is because a data breach is career ending. And so as you all are thinking about systems, tools, structures, et cetera, your ability to show that you can protect the data, the information for a system, for children, for a school is critically important, because we've watched data breaches, expose our children, expose our families in ways that are simply not helpful. And so that is something, as we are starting to think about what's next, that's top of mind for me. Like I want to be able to track my children on buses, but I don't want you to be able to track my children on buses. And that's a critical tension that I'm living with every single day.
Heather?
Amen to that. Agree. I want to link back to something that Thomas said earlier around procurement, and then linking to what he's sharing now about ROI on the back end of operations. A lot of how superintendents will start to look at things, myself included, is through performance-based contracts. Contracts that actually set mutual goals that we are all working towards, and then if those goals are not met, there's a holdback. I mean, we're not in the business of I sometimes say, I don't have ATM on my forehead. And districts have very finite resources, not just because of the ASU cliff, but because funding in many states is not up to where it needs to be, especially for special education, for example. So we need to do more with less. And as we look at our contracts moving forward for a variety of things, there has to be an ROI. There has to be mutual performance goals, both on the operations as well as on the academic impact side.
Excellent point. I think you will see more of that in the procurement offices. Specific deliverables and pay for performance, which is a coined term that we are quite fond of in public education. Let me move on to this notion of cybersecurity. So when it comes to AI, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity, I want to hear your thoughts around that whole issue. ChatGPT is on the horizon. Actually, it's probably in many classrooms already. Here's the thing that we know for sure. If we don't get in front of it, our students will, because they are digital natives. They already are on top of it. We have to get in front of it. So let's talk a little bit about both the notion of artificial intelligence in our classrooms. I'm going to start with Christina this time. Artificial intelligence in our classrooms, fears, dreads. What do we need from EdTech to help us manage that? And then anything about cybersecurity in general.
So I'm going to age myself. Raise your hand if you used encyclopedias as a child. All right, now there's some people who don't have their hands up, so we see you. But that's where we are right now, right? When you think back to how we
They don't even know what an encyclopedia is.
Yeah, they're like, what?
Ask
If you were
them.
like my family, we went to the supermarket every week and we picked a different level until we had a full set. You got Encyclopedia Britannica, all right, okay. Britannica, that's how we learned. But we don't do that anymore. Children are like, what? Books, library, that's a thing? That's where we are right now. Like, AI is here to stay, all of these systems and structures are here to stay, and it's my position that we actually have to embrace these tools and help our students normalize how this should live and breathe in their education ecosystem. We are in the process of passing digital literacy standards and setting up system policies around plagiarism beyond what we saw plagiarism to be in our high school and college experiences, but we need tools that would be able to tell us up front that this is an essay that was composed using AI, and this is an essay that was composed by a human being. And there are devices that help suss that out. Those are the types of tools that we'll need to embrace this new future, and you'll continuously hear us say we need professional development targeted to teachers to help them incorporate these new aspects of learning into their classroom. It is critically important. You could have a student use GPT to form an outline, to put to scale of an essay, to do X, Y, Z, but we have to help educators understand how do you take those tools and still yield a product, that can be said was created by an individual. And again, I think back to what we experienced during the pandemic. I wrote an entire dissertation without leaving my house because I couldn't. Had access to libraries all across the country and globe. Materials were scanned, sent to my house, sent back. Like, we are here and we are in it. And what I would hope is that we are empowering our educators to use these tools, because I think that's where the opportunity gap exists for children across this country. There are, just like during the pandemic, there were some schools that the second the doors closed, they flipped to virtual. Those children learned, there were no gaps. And when school reopened, they returned and they kept moving. That is what's going to take place as we move further into AI technology. Certain schools who have embraced these systems, have professional development, have learned how to incorporate these things into their classrooms, their students will be empowered for the new future, and then there will be other students left behind because they are not receiving that same sort of support, or the tools will be used against them, and those students will be disciplined for using tools that they should have been taught how to use properly in an academic setting.
You make an important point, too. We cannot have this rush back to what we believe was normal. You've heard it before, normal was not serving all children anyway, so we don't need this rush back to normal. We have to take advantage of what the pandemic provided for us. Individualized learning, mastery learning is what we called it years ago. Individualized learning can be a reality and much more accepted now because of the pandemic. So we have the capacity, we need to take advantage of it, and technology can help us do that more smoothly. Thomas?
Yeah, I've just got one piece to add to this, and this is maybe a little controversial, but it is something that we need to keep in the back of our minds, and it's that what role do we want parents to have in this conversation? During much of the pandemic, we stood at arm's length as an industry with a lot of our parents in many communities, and it really is time to bridge that gap and bring them back on to team education. They were always there, they will always be there, but there are some political issues that are tied to that, and we need to find ways to build that bridge back with our parents so that we are all still a part of that same trusting team looking out for the best interest of our kids. Something that Christina said that really struck a nerve with me is how we take care of our data and how we take care to include folks in the next phase of whatever new technology may be on the horizon. And it's just important in the back of our minds that we not forget about our parents. And I think that that's going to be an important part for our EdTech partners. As you think about things, think about our students as the end users, our teachers as the end users, but also our parents as peripheral users as well.
Heather?
On that note of our students as the end users, they already know the ways around how to navigate. So I think a perfect task that could be designed by a teacher would be, tell me how I would prevent you from plagiarizing. Tell me the quality checks that actually would allow me to know that you did your thinking, your research, that you incorporated into your paper, primary sources, pros, cons, analysis. And we actually let our students lead the way with that. Our teachers already know. I had one classroom that I went to 2 weeks ago where the teacher went back to writing on hard paper with pencil and pen. And I said, why are you doing that? And it was really so that the students could create the outline using their brain, and then they could go and direct the resources available to them to help actually fill in the actual writing and the content. So there's multiple drafts and incorporating, like we did anyways as English teachers, which I was, that you have many versions. You actually then have them do many versions in different formats and modalities so that they can show their critical thinking, their development of analysis and an argument. All of that said, those are the details behind what we need to do for upskilling, and trust that our teachers will also lead the way in figuring that out. But we need to figure out how to scale that more quickly, those insights and those best practices and those shining examples.
I think that's a critical point. I'm going to Iranetta in just 1 second. That's a critical point, though. We have to teach our children to be curators of the information. How many of you have ever heard a young person say, well, it must be true, it's on the internet? They have to be taught how to curate, since they don't have encyclopedias anymore, which once it's printed, surely it's true. They have to be taught how to curate and judge some things that they find on the internet, because everything on the internet is not true. That's a critical point. Iranetta.
I think the last thing that I would add is we also want to think about AI and all of the elements that go along with that as a part of access and a part of equity. Because what we know in a lot of our schools where our students are higher performing or our parents have more access, these are programs that they've been using for a period of time, and they know how to utilize them and in some instances manipulate. But when you go to some schools that are underperforming, they don't always have the same access. And so how do you make sure that you are being equitable in the information that's being provided, and also teaching children the best ways to use the tools and resources while we're also learning from them at the same time? So I think that it's really important when we think about all of the tools that are there and available, how are we also connecting that to overall access for children?
I like that. Our last question is going to be around digital equity, but let me make one additional point around cybersecurity, because we've had districts actually suffer from cyber piracy, where someone sends you this email and says, we've just taken control of all of your data and pay us this much money, or we're going to release it on the black web and we're going to release it for everyone, including your employees' social security information, banking information, student identification, etc. We thought 2 years ago, Bob, I believe it was, Council of Great City Schools had this conversation, maybe 3 years ago, and we thought, oh, surely nobody would do that to K-12, public education. No, they're going to hit banks, they're going to hit hospitals. Hospitals are really severely at risk. They're going to hit others. No, they're hitting school districts as well. So if I were in a startup company or a company considering some ways to expand, I would really look at ways to provide cybersecurity. Insurance companies don't want to touch it. They will insure you for a very small amount of money if you pay a very large premium, to which we said, well, we might as well just be self-insured if the premium is that high and you're only going to cover this much of the exposure. And so some districts have to simply say to those pirates, those thieves, I'd like to say, they have to say, you know what, we can't pay you, so do what you're going to do. It shouldn't be that way. I want someone to come up with ways of securing and protecting districts and digital systems from some of the foolishness around piracy on the internet. Just had to get that in. All right, digital equity. So, as you know, federal infrastructure package approved a couple of years ago included $65 billion to expand broadband. This whole notion of access and equity. Now, as a result of that package, all states are developing digital equity plans to help ensure that people of color, low-income individuals, those with disabilities, and other populations under the law will have access to broadband. I want to commend Chiefs for Change. They did quite a bit of lobbying to get that passed. So here's the question. What should be the highest priority with respect to digital equity in your community? And since we have one state chief here, I'm going to start with you, Christina.
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, it's work that Bob and the folks at Chiefs have introduced me to, and I will stay at the state level, but it's ensuring that you have graduation requirements that are grounded in computer science, ensuring children have access to computer science coursework. You'd be surprised from a equity stance how many systems children graduate, and keyboarding no longer exists, but computer science class doesn't exist either. Children are not taught how to code. They're not taught how to create systems and structures to disrupt what's being in front of them. And so, you know, nationally we're having this huge battle about TikTok, but we actually aren't teaching students how to build apps that could even compete with that work. And so I would say at the state level around having policies that say students should not be able to graduate from high school without having strong computer literacy skills, having access to coding. That should be a part of your pathway to graduation if you are going to come out and be able to compete in this global technological world. And I think in DC, you know, it's very clear, if you come out with strong computer science skills, you can go to college, but you also could make a tremendous amount of money, you know, the second you walk across the stage. And for a lot of children who are first-generation college graduates, immigrants to this country, et cetera, they actually need to be high skill, high wage as soon as possible. And I think both state and national policies that push us forward in that area is where we should start.
Excellent. Thomas, $65 billion. Where would you put the highest priorities?
A couple of years ago, I wrote an op-ed called The New Pencil, and it was about how the mobile hotspot is the next critical component in students' backpacks. I'm very proud of the colleagues that I'm sitting up here, up on this stage with today, because all four of us, including Barbara, are warriors for equitable access for our kids. As much as I would love to focus on programs and I would love to focus on a lot of the educational initiatives that happen in the classroom, I can't neglect the fact that I have a large portion of my students that do not have the world at their fingertips. All of the folks in this room do. There's a challenge there, and that whether you're living in a rural community or you're living in another community that has dead zones, having access to broadband is critically important, and then having access to a device that can then get you to have the world at your fingertips is critically important. I think that this is a national issue. I think that this is a critical first step that we need to overcome, and then we absolutely need to focus on more opportunities for all kids to be next-gen learners.
Iranetta?
I think the last thing that I would add is, I think I've said that like 4 times today, the last thing I'll add. But I think the last thing that I will add is, as we think about even our local communities, Christina talked about the state, Thomas talked about federally, but as we're engaging with our local communities, you know, I shared early on with our team, with our local team, that I imagine a city that has a cloud. And so we were able to start that work this year with one of our low-income housing developments and areas where the students have full access at this particular location, one of the largest in our city. And while it seems very small, it's huge because it gives that access to a place that was a dead zone. So as we're trying to really make sure that we have the appropriate policies in place, beginning some of those conversations at the local level with your local companies about how you're able to move this work forward, really knowing that it's going to have an immediate benefit for the city. Because not only does it impact the students that are a part of the city, it impacts the families that are a part of the city as well.
And Iranetta, would you say in Cincinnati there's local government support for a cloud or broadband access for the entire community?
There is extreme support at this point, and knowing that there is additional federal dollars that go along with that support is really getting the individuals in the room. So the conversation was one that, of course, that started with our local leadership, including our mayor, around where we're really able to go with this work.
Excellent. Heather, last word.
I'll flip the question a little bit. So agree with everything. It's important also, even our housing developments bake in wireless, right, to their low-income or affordable housing units, because that's an important component to our community health and our future access to education. I'll flip it and just charge people who might be product or service developers to also think about equity as a core value as you design product and how you respond to district needs. I need my service providers understand that that race and ethnicity are two different things and why. So that's an example. We need to have field and data collection that represents the diversity of our students at large. So that's something that I wanted to flip a little bit.
Fantastic. So inquiring minds wanted to know, you heard it here first, what's next in EdTech? What this next generation of EdTech leaders want from EdTech. Thank you for listening.